Welcome to the Naked Podcaster. Get ready to hear stories of someone brave enough to bear it all. Let's get naked. Welcome to the Naked Podcaster. Today I have on Jae LaVelle, and we are naked for you together. How are you doing today?
Together, naked.
Naked.
With a stranger.
I mean, worse things have happened or more unusual things. You're not totally a stranger. Actually, you're a co-host on a podcast, and I was a guest on once. And it was a really great experience. It was a group podcast. So I want you to jump in. Dark Horse Studios is your website, but you can find that a couple different ways. So you jump in and explain that.
Sure. Okay, I'll tell you all about me. And I have to say, this is the first time I think that I've been on the camera like this naked. It's like weird. It's seeing all this stuff in here. Like, oh wow, you really are hairy, aren't you? Okay, so my website, one of many, is www.jaenlavelle.com. And when you type that in, it's going to revert to one of these Wix sites addresses that says Dark Horse Studios 3. But that's basically my author page, and you can go there. You can find out about the books that I write, and I'll tell you a little bit about them now. That way, it'll save you the trouble here. But I write paranormal stuff. I write horror books that are just kind of creepy and scary. They're not really slasher gore type horror, although there is death in them, and there is sex, and there's the other stuff that you would expect to find in horror stories. But it's not all blood and guts. I really am trying to focus more on a character's journey through a really strange situation or a strange time in their life. And so that's what I write about. I actually like to take bits of real life. In fact, the first book that I ever wrote is called The Cold Room. And I wrote that because my wife and I lived in a house that was also occupied by something else, something not of this world anymore. And we never really knew what she was, only that she really didn't like to be talked about a whole lot. And so the more we brought her up, or strange things that might be happening in the house, the more often strange things would happen. So I was like, okay, well, we're not going to talk about this for a few years. And eventually, when we bought another house, I started compiling these events and building a fictional story out of them, using kind of the real life stuff as the backbone, which I really love doing, because I feel like it not only does it make it easier to write a story when you're starting with a real life event, but I feel like it gives it a good strong foundation to fall back on when you get stuck in the middle of writing. So that's what I write. I like to write creepy stuff that makes you think and maybe makes your skin crawl a little bit more than seeing this might make your skin crawl. So jaenlavelle.com is where you find info on my books. And I would love for you to check them out. I think there's some really great stuff up there. I'm really proud of them. But I also do kind of a lot more than that at this point. When I met Jen, we were not naked. We were on the Spilling Ink podcast, and or actually, there's a little sign for Spilling Ink behind me there on the wall, I think.
Oh yeah, there is.
Spilling Ink is it's like an author roundtable or an author panel show where usually 4 to 6 people get together over in a Zoom type setting like this, and we all just kind of chat about life and what we're writing and the publishing business and any troubles we might be having with our books or with ourselves personally. And sometimes we talk about things like are Pop-Tarts better than toaster strudels, which is ridiculous because toaster strudels are the best. But it's kind of whatever comes up, and it's just a really good time, and it's an excuse for us all to chat with other people who are in the same field and in the creative business, and I think that's good for us to unwind a little bit, especially if you have a lot of kids like I do, or many kids like you do. It's nice to be able to have some grown-up time, I think. So that's the Spilling Ink podcast, and that's a lot of fun. And I also have another podcast that I do. It's called Unafraid, and Unafraid is completely different. nothing to do with writing or publishing industry whatsoever. And it's all about sharing stories from the LGBTQ plus community, kind of stories of strength or survival or thriving in a world that a lot of times doesn't accept queer people. And so it's a very intense show. Sometimes there's laughter, sometimes there's a lot of tears, but it's something that I wanted to do to not only to provide a little bit of education for people who might not be in the queer community or might not have the same experiences as others, but also just to send some love out there into the world and said, hey, we're here and we're people. We struggle just like everyone else on this planet, and just kind of a way to connect with others.
I love
Yeah,
that. I had no idea you did that.
yeah, yep. Boy, I felt like I was supposed to do that for 20 minutes, and it's only 9 minutes now. And I was like, oh boy, that's not good. I went way too fast through that stuff.
No, no, it's all good. I love the paranormal stuff because I don't understand it, but I've always, since I was a little kid, sensed it around me. So I love what you said about the house. I had a house that, like, the cabinets used to be open. It wasn't anything really exceptional, just more like confusing. Like, why that? Why now? And then I went through a period of time where I found dimes everywhere, and I looked it up, and it's like someone from the other side is thinking about you. And I mean, it was like crazy. I'd sweep the floor, walk back into the room, and there'd be a dime in the middle of the floor. And I'm alone in the house, that sort of thing. Like, really? Back when I was a kid, you'd call somebody with a dime. That's like not, that's not what I'm talking about. So 6 books, you have 6 books, 2 podcasts, and
Yeah.
Spilling Ink is a ton of fun.
Yeah, it really is. We just have a great time. The original hosts on Spilling Ink were David Jones and Katie Salidas, and I was actually a guest on the first or second episode, and I had told them at that time, "Hey, this is a great time. I'm happy to come back and help out anytime." And then a couple of weeks later, they were like, "Yeah, why don't you just come in and host this with us?" And so I started
That's
as a relief host, and now I'm on all the time. And yeah, it's a really good time. We have so many fun people come on. I know when you came on, we had a very long and great discussion, kind of on life and dealing with life and quarantine.
yeah.
And it was a lot of fun. So we meet so many people that are so wildly different in their lives. It's at one point we had on a one guest was a cop and the other was an archaeologist, and I was like, man, this is amazing. I mean,
Yeah.
who else just gets to talk to this kind of variety of people?
Do
That
you
was
have
a good
guests on
thing.
your other podcast, on the
Yeah,
Unafraid? So it's the
yeah.
same thing, right? I have the most interesting guests. Every single podcast episode I record, I walk out and my husband will say, "Hey, how was your episode?" I'm like, "That was my favorite episode ever," because every one of them are I mean, genuinely, there's a couple in there maybe not the case, and maybe some stand out higher than others, but every time I get to connect with people, it's so interesting. It's so much fun, right?
It
So I
is.
love that.
Oh yeah.
I, I want to go back in time. You are from Michigan originally?
Yes. The land of Mish. Yes, I am from Michigan originally. Yeah, we traveled around the country when I was just a wee baby still, but yeah, born in Michigan.
So take me back to your story because I know that there's a lot. I don't know anything about your story, actually.
I was gonna say you don't know my story.
I know nothing. Usually I have bullet points, but you have me flying blind, which is totally fine. Um,
well, well,
you did make one comment though. You said, "I don't consider my life a triumph, more like a survival."
well, yeah, and you're for those of you who haven't seen her sign up sheet, she asks you to talk about, points of your struggle and things like that. And I'm like, well, I'm still struggling. So I don't really, I can't really talk about this in the past tense.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, okay. So, going back in time from a 40-year-old and kind of try to figure out where things went awry, it's tough, but I'll tell you when I knew that there was something really wrong in my head, in my brain, and it was probably around high school, which for a lot of people is when issues with personality disorders or mental illness really rear their heads. And so in late middle school, I started writing little stories, and they were always ghastly and gruesome and terrible, and the teachers would hate them, and the other kids would love them. So of course, I enjoyed that. But going into high school, I was this very, very small child who had gone to a Catholic school their entire schooling and was in a public school for the first time. So I was already in a place that was very unfamiliar and uncomfortable. And of course, as a 14-year-old, for boys, you're starting to really experience your hormones for the first time, and so the next year or two became kind of consumed with this idea of having a girlfriend. It's having a girlfriend and not getting picked on by the older kids. And okay, so that's not terribly abnormal, right? Many 14-year-old boys have this type of experience. But I would say junior year or so of high school, um, depression was really starting to take a hold of me in a big way, where nothing could make me happy anymore. Nothing at all. I was no longer a super small, teeny tiny kid that was getting beat up in the locker rooms. I had devoted a significant amount of time to working out and becoming a larger person so that I could avoid that. But my focus became women and sex, and it wasn't even so much, the physical act of having sex with someone. It was the kind of that dance leading up to being able to have sex with someone. The seduction or the manipulation or whatever it was an exertion of power, really, is what it was. It was me trying to show that I could put myself in any situation by talking myself into it, and I was very, very good at it. And fast forward back to just the last couple of years, trying to understand that it's my own way, trying to deal with a very powerless life and being completely powerless to my own mental illness. But I used that to convince, however many girls that thought I was cute, that yeah, it's a good idea to sleep with me. I think that's great. And at the time, I probably was very, very proud of that. And thought, hey, you're just, like a Don Juan, or you're so smooth and you're so suave. Um, and the Jay of today is really disgusted with that person, because I had so many issues that I was dealing with. I lived in a home that had some abuse going on in it. I had, well, we won't go too deep into the home life, because they're all still living, and who knows what they end up watching. But a really strange home life, and I know now, a bipolar person with extreme depression, and I was never medicated for it. I never had any kind of counseling for it. So, um, if you know much about depression or bipolar, which actually a lot of people do nowadays, it can be crippling, and it can be devastating, not only for the person, but for the people around them. People with depression can really destroy others' lives as well, because and I'm not just talking about suicidal behavior, which I didn't get into until I was much older, but just because I hated myself so much, I didn't have a problem tearing down people around me. So by the time I got bored with talking girls into having sex with me, it was more moving on into how can I just make people feel as terrible as possible. And during that time, I didn't do any writing at all, except for a handful of terrible poems here and there. And my life became largely just about consuming anything that might make me feel good.
Mm.
I was a lifelong smoker. Any kind of drugs or alcohol, anything I get my hands on, sex, that was just another, something to try to make you feel good. And at the time, I didn't realize that I did anything maliciously against other people. But again, looking back as an adult person, it's obvious, that I wanted to show people how much I was hurting by hurting them as well. That makes perfectly good sense. Um, and it's something I'm really not proud of, and I wish that I could go back and wipe out completely. And people say you never want to wish for that because then you wouldn't be the person you are now. But I do wish for that because I wish I could wipe out all the hurt that I made other people feel, because I don't think that's right to cause another person hurt. But all right, I'm getting off subject here. Not that I
No,
had
you're
really.
not at all. I mean, this is so true. And when you're in a home where your depression or feeling or bipolar is not being diagnosed and recognized and you're not getting help, I feel like, especially like you said, especially at that age, you're channeling into wherever you can. It's not directly malicious action. It's not knowing what to do, I think.
Yeah, well, and it was a really confusing time. I had no idea who I actually was. And,
Yeah.
um, looking back now, I think that my whole life I've been searching for some kind of identity because I've never really felt like I fit in any particular place. So, um, and so I can understand that, but I try not to give myself too much too much slack because again, we all make our decisions, and there are plenty of people who are raised or lived in bad situations that don't do bad things to other people. um, and so I don't want to, I'm not going to make excuses for myself, except for
Absolutely
maybe,
not.
you know
Absolutely
I,
not.
I was hurting and I made other people hurt, and that was kind of the bottom line when it came to that. But okay, so then you get into 20s, right?
Yes.
I'm starting to have kids because of course that's a really smart idea to do. Yeah, when you're
That
19,
makes
20 years old.
everything better.
It makes
They're so
everything better.
easy. It's fun.
Yes,
You,
easy breezy. So I've got kids, and I have a long-term girlfriend that I live with, and life is as you would expect for 19, 20-year-old, couples that have a young kid. It's hard. Life is hard.
yeah.
And things are pretty uneventful for quite a while. And, that relationship falls apart and doesn't really do a whole lot to me because, again, I'm in my early 20s and I don't really care about anything. I'm working and drinking and making money. And so by late 20s, I make the decision actually to go back to school and get back into writing. And I get into writing for local magazines, and so doing nonfiction articles, things like that. Super boring, but it also kind of primes that writing switch again. I think so. I start writing creatively again. It's a lot of fun. I'm writing short stories. They're not quite as gruesome as they used to be, but everyone still does die. You know, met some cute girls in college, of course, and one of those cute girls that I met happened to be one of the instructors in the photography department, yeah, who is now my wife. And
Oh,
so we've had a wonderful relationship. We started working together as a photography couple, doing weddings, things like that. And she's always kind of taken the lead in our relationship in our life because she is very strong and very smart and so much more together than I ever have been in my life. She's lived through some abuses as well, and comes from a family where substance abuse was a really big problem. So she, the first night that we went out, we had a long conversation, and we actually stayed the night together, but it was just talking, and it was amazing. And she said to me, because I was asking about her past, and she was telling me all this crazy stuff, and she says, yeah, but we all have a past, and I don't want mine to define me. And that was really, really special to me. And I'm sure that there have been variations on that same sentiment that have been used in movies or books and by other people, but I never really thought about that before. That all of the baggage that I have been carrying around didn't necessarily have to be me. It could have just been, a part of me that I left behind. And so that was I feel like that was a really positive moment for me with her. And of course, we've had our ups and downs, especially at first. But fast forward again, and we get married. Life is good. More kids. We've got 4 kids. 4 kids. It's so
It's a
many. It's not.
lot. How many did
It's
you have in your early 20s with your girlfriend?
um, just one actually.
Okay, okay.
Just one. That thank goodness. Thank goodness.
Okay, so you had one already, and then you had three more with your wife?
Yeah, I had one, and she had two with her ex-husband, and then we had one together. So we have four
Got it.
total. But they've all they all live with us now, and so it's well, some are in college, um, but anyhow, yeah. So it was a good thing. Like I said, and it was challenging, especially with a blended family at first. Trying to figure out how everything works together with that many different personalities coming from different places. Um, but all in all, it was a good thing. And we moved into the house where we experienced the strange paranormal things that happened in the book The Cold Room, which you should definitely check out. It's a fun read. But okay, so yeah, blah, blah, blah. Now we're parents of 4. Life just keeps moving on. I'm working whatever jobs I can stand to keep because I don't love to work all that much. And I'm self-publishing books. I found a friend here in town who taught me what self-publishing was, and she said, "This is something you can actually do. Your manuscript is pretty good." And so I said, "Okay." So I kept writing, and I did it for fun. And I wouldn't even tell people that I was working on a book because I was afraid if people knew, it would be too much pressure, and I wouldn't actually be able to write the book. Right? Um, so, I think,
That's really common, I think.
yeah, a great many of us do.
Yeah.
Uh, so yes, writing, self-publishing, getting more tattoos all over the place. Um, this is actually my wife right here. She modeled for this one.
Oh, I love
Um,
that.
yeah,
What
she
does
hates
the
it when
other
I
one
point that out.
say on your chest, your upper right?
Words
Yeah.
are weapons.
Ooh, wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
I know, cheesy, but so true. Um, okay, so let's see here. I'm trying to find something relevant to point you to here. So I think this was probably now 3 years ago. We'll make a big leap here. 3 years ago, I tried to kill myself. I tried to overdose on benzos and alcohol, and unfortunately, um, the warnings were grossly exaggerated. Um, not nearly as
Oh
dangerous
my
as you guys
God.
think. Don't
I can't believe you just said that. That's
don't
awesome. Okay. Okay.
don't
All right. We're talking about suicide here. So you took all these
don't
pills. It won't
don't just
work,
start
guys.
taking
Don't try.
Xanax and Ambien. It's not going to do anything. You'll get a bad headache. Um, so anyhow, so I didn't die,
I
obviously.
mean, or this would be a totally different podcast, but
Oh, so yeah, so
so an
I'm
unsuccessful suicide attempt.
unsuccessful suicide attempt, and really it was funny enough because I was having a really bad depressive swing, and bear in mind that I only got diagnosed as bipolar a few years ago, so
Right.
this was all brand new to me. I went to see a therapist, a counselor here in town, and it was that day, and that was the first time I'd seen a counselor about my depression, that I went home and I was like, it's time to die, motherfucker. Uh, and I think it was just because, so much stuff had come up that I wasn't prepared to deal with I didn't know what to do with it. I was like, I can't do this. It's too much. So I picked a huge fight with my wife, for no reason whatsoever. I don't even know what it was about. And I basically sat in the living room drinking Fireball and popping Xanax and Ambien. And my goal was that by the time it was bedtime, I would have so much in my system, and my respiration would be so depressed that I just wouldn't wake up again. And in my head, it sounded great. But what happened was, well, for anyone who has not taken Xanax or Ambien, it makes you really tired. So after a few Xanax and Ambien and a few Fireballs, I just fell asleep. And that was it. There was no grand exit from the world. There was no huge statement or anything like that. It was just, yeah, I'm asleep, drooling on the chair, looking like an idiot after picking a huge fight with my wife. So next day, she finds out what I was actually up to, because apparently I sent some goodbye messages to people that night before, and they contacted her and go into treatment to talk about everything that's going on. And mental illness has kind of a stifling effect on creativity. So while this is happening, I'm not writing anything at all, really. I'm just trying to be alive and trying to understand why being dead would be so much better than being around with my wife and kids. And it's not something I can really answer, because I love my wife and kids more than myself, and I say I would do anything for them. So why is it that I wouldn't want to be here to be with them? So I was really battling with this idea of why did that seem like it was okay to me? Why did I think that that was an acceptable solution to this problem? But people don't realize just what depression feels like. I mean, you just absolutely, there's just no joy. There's just no joy in your life whatsoever. But anyhow, I am not a psychologist, so I can't really give you a good definition there. And I'm not really sure where I'm going, Jen, but I feel like there's some kind of something coming that I'm working towards, maybe. Um, oh, okay. How about this? So this whole time I'm trying to figure out what the hell happened and why I am the way I am and why I have been so much of my life. And I pick up a book off NetGalley called Love Lives Here. And this is a book by a Canadian author, Amanda Jete Knox, and she's a trans rights activist. I read this book because I was going to review it and have her on Spilling Ink, and I was like, okay, that's fine. And I read it, and this story is about her wife coming out as a transgender woman, and a lot of other stuff in here. But and I don't want to give you the whole story because it's really her story to tell. But reading that book made me realize that there was more going on with me than, okay, you're depressed, or you're bipolar. That I've actually been dealing with some gender dysphoria since I was very, very young, that I never recognized because I didn't know what it was. There wasn't language for it. It wasn't something that was talked about in my house. That I grew up being raised as a man and doing manly things and wanting a manly body, and covering myself with hyper masculine artifacts and things like this, when in actuality there was really something different going on in there. And that's something that I'm still figuring out. I call myself a non-binary person or a genderqueer person right now. And that's just someone that doesn't identify as the gender they were assigned at birth. So when you're born, doctor sees your primary sex characteristics and says, okay, you have a boy or a girl. But sometimes our brains don't work quite that way. So, I have all sorts of stuff that's just kind of swirling around in my brain. But as soon as I read that book and had a really good long cry, um, I was able to find a little bit of peace because I was like, okay, well, I see so many similarities here with what these people have gone through and what I've gone through that this is actually making a lot more sense than it should. And so then you kind of retcon your life and see what you find, and see what lines up. And a lot of this, trying to be the most manly man you can be is really, um, kind of shading something else. And for every person that could be different, but for me it was the fact that I really am not the manliest man you'll ever find. There's a big part of me that is very, very feminine, maybe more so than the masculine part. And by trying to squish that down my whole life, I was creating this huge imbalance within myself that just would kind of lash out from time to time and cause chaos, not only for me but for the people around me. And so now I'm a person that I know what I look like. I know what I sound like. Um, my wife calls me husband. My kids call me dad, and that's a big part of my identity. And I'm perfectly fine with that. But knowing that I am not just that thing, I am not just boy, has allowed me to give myself a little bit more grace and trying to understand the things that I've done in my life and how I can move forward to be a better person. And it's all going to be very complicated and challenging, but I know now that when depression flares up again, I was like, okay, well, is this because of something that's happening in the physical world here, or is this something that's related to a gender dysphoria, or is this a bipolar issue? And it helps me to be able to work on a problem rather than just flounder and think, why do I want to die? Why does everything hurt so bad? And so I think that's a good thing. And so in the last couple of years, I started writing again. I published a book of short stories with Three Furies Press, and they're all short. I'll tell you what, if you've ever seen the shows The Twilight Zone or Black Mirror, they're similar to that. So they're kind of horror, creepy stories, but not all the way horror, creepy stories either. It's a lot of fun. I'm extremely proud of it. I'm really excited for people to read it. It came out at the beginning of the year, and I think it's had a really good response. So if you're looking to check out one of my books, that's what I would start with. It's called A Flutter of Darkness, and it's 15 dark tales. Some of them are pretty creepy. Some of them are a little bit more lighthearted. And the idea with it is that I kind of want to get under your skin a little bit. I want to make you think about things that are maybe a little bit uncomfortable, or things that maybe you just haven't thought about before or haven't thought about in a certain way. Because I think that that's important for us as humans, is perspective. I think we in general will look at our perspective as the right way. That's just how we look at things. Just like when you see a hero's journey in a book told through their point of view, that's the right way, right? But if you turn things around a little bit, it can look totally different. And so I tried to approach things from different angles, not only to force myself to explore it, but to force you to explore it as well. So there's my big plug. Like I said, I don't really have a story arc story right now because it's still going. This story is going to be going for maybe a little while yet. But so that's just kind of my background on some of my messed up brain.
Well, your unique brain, not messed up. I
Oh,
do have
well, there we go.
I
There we
do
go.
have questions though. When you went, first of all, you've been with your wife for a decade, correct? Do I have that timeline right? A little more
Uh,
than that?
I think so. Well, let's see here. Yeah,
You
about
said
13 years, I think,
13
somewhere
years.
in there.
Okay, you said
Yeah.
late 20s and that you were 40. So I'm trying to
Yep.
put it together. So one thing is when this reared up and you went to a, what prompted you to finally go to a therapist? And were you relieved that, not that there's a label or you fit into a box, but that you could make sense of what your thought processes were? Was it a relief to be diagnosed with bipolar and depression?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And they are very, very hesitant to diagnose people with any one thing nowadays. And they say it's because they don't want to, get it in your head and close off other avenues of treatment. And I think that there's something to do with billing as well, with what they can bill you for, and still provide you with treatment. I think it's really convoluted, but yes, it was a relief. It was scary, but at least I know, oh, I have this disease and they can actually treat it with some things. So that was, it was, I mean, it was, it was not easy to get in to see a psychiatrist. They are few and far between here in Michigan. And basically it took a suicide attempt to get me an appointment with a psychiatrist, which really sucks. That is not right. But anyhow, yes, having that label, I'll tell you what, it really helps. It does, because then when people ask you, what's going on, well, I have bipolar, and at first you're like, yeah, I want to talk to you about it because I'm just learning about this, and it actually helps me to talk to people about this, and you feel like by explaining it to people, they're going to understand better why you were such a nutcase, the whole time you knew them. But yeah, so I think that really helped. I think that I do well with psychiatrists, not so much with counselors and psychologists. Um, I tend to, when I talk too deep into a problem, it starts churning stuff up, and then I get really down about it, and I don't think I'll have another suicide attempt. I hope I don't, but at the same time, I try not to tempt that by wading too deep into those waters, and when I don't know how deep they really go. So, but a psychiatrist, they're going to ask you a few questions about how you've been, and be like, here's your pills, and I actually prefer that. Like, no, just fix it with chemicals. That's what I want to do, which probably isn't great, but yeah, that's me.
It's not a bad, I don't think that I think there's a lot of pros and cons. I don't think there's right and wrong. And you have figured out what works best for you, which is really important. And, I have kids that have struggled, and I have one daughter that's like, I don't ever want to go on medication. And I said, like, that's not a bad thing. If that's the route that you need to take, because then you're healthy and you're happy, why is that a bad thing? It doesn't have to be the only thing. It doesn't have to be the be all end all, but don't ever put yourself down if that's the route that you go.
Oh yeah, for
Why
sure.
would you?
And I mean, it can go so much farther too. One of my daughters, and I'll mention it because I know she's fine with me talking about it. And she's 18 now, about to leave for college in 2 days, and she has medication-resistant major depression, which is freaking awful. Um, and it's one of the scariest things I've ever watched as a parent, because no matter what the doctors tried to do to help her, she tanked further and further and further. And she actually ended up having electroconvulsive therapy, ECT, for months, which is pretty extreme. But it helped her a great deal. And it's scary to talk about because people look at some of these therapies and they're like, oh, and I I don't know. There's still such a stigma around such a BS stigma around mental health. But really, some of these things can save our kids' lives. And things like just being open and affirming to your kids, when they tell you that they have depression, or mom, there's something wrong. I feel sad all the time and I don't know why. Hey, right fucking then,
Yeah.
there's something wrong. You need to make an appointment to see a doctor right then. You've got to jump on it. Or if your child comes to you and tells you, mom, dad, I think I'm trans, or I think I'm gay. I mean, these queer kids are more at risk for suicide than anyone else in this country. Jump on it right away. Be affirming. Tell them you love them. That's all they need to hear, that you
Yeah.
love them and you're going to help them whatever it takes. Just love your freaking kids. Um, but so yeah, so it's a scary thing, being a 40-year-old person who has survived themselves for so long. I feel like I've made a couple positive connections in my life. And really, when I do die, which is, by the way, going to be battling a great white shark to save someone's life, um,
Of
my
course,
goal is for
obviously.
that's what it's going to be. My goal is for there to be at least a few people that said, yeah, Jay made my life better. And that's really all I want at this point, because I know I caused so much pain for so many people when I was young, so I guess I'm going to be always trying to atone for that.
What changed in your relationship with your wife, and how did it change? Because you're still together,
Mm.
you're still hanging out. Was she pissed about your suicide attempt? Was she sad? And how have
Yeah.
you navigated the last couple of years? Because that's, I mean, you get a diagnosis, you have a suicide attempt, which is huge,
Mm.
and then you go to therapy and you get diagnosed and you're on medication, and then you have all these realizations after reading the book. That those are
Yeah.
pretty enormous changes within a marriage. I don't know if you know
Right.
that, right? Yeah.
Those are a very, very big deal. And uh, not everyone is as lucky as I am to have a marriage that's still intact and strong. We have a very strong marriage. After the suicide attempt, she was pretty distraught. Understandably so. There wasn't a lot of trust between us. She wouldn't let me alone. All the pills and dangerous things in the house had to be locked up all the time, and that was doctor's orders. Um, yeah, there's, and I tell this as a funny story now because we laugh about it now. The first time we made love after the attempt, in the middle of it, she busted out crying and completely broke down. And so we just laid there together with me saying, "I'm so sorry. I'm gonna get better. I'm getting better." And she was just like, "I just don't ever want to lose you ever. I don't care what's happening. I just don't ever want to lose you." Um, and that was a big deal right there. As silly as that moment might seem, that it was kind of like, you better fucking talk to me from now on, no matter how dark and how terrible it is, because I'm gonna help you. I may be a crying, blubbering mess, but we're gonna get through it together. Um, and so that was a big thing. Um, and then realizing issues with my own gender identity.
Yeah.
That's still an ongoing thing, and my wife is amazing. She's working hard to use the pronouns that I prefer, which are they them, and she's doing a great job with trying to understand something that's really difficult to understand, and it's difficult for me as well. So she's, I don't know, she's just really smart and really strong and really brave. I mean, she's kind of like, I don't know, she's kind of like one of those characters in a movie that's just, what do they call him? Not a Mary Jane character. That's not right. But she's one of those characters that's just fierce and strong and beautiful and smart and has all the things. There's like no flaws. And that's how I see her. She's just like my warrior princess. She's freaking amazing. Um, but she totally carries this family, because if I break down or one of my kids breaks down, she's the one that carries us through. And she deserves all the credit for us being here.
I love that. Now, you said if we started with one book, because when you have six, you have to give me a starting point. I purchase and read every book that every guest has ever written, but only one. So if I have somebody like the guest that was on, Christine Raymond, with the two of us on Spilling Ink, she's like, I have 17. I'm like, all right, I'm really proud of you, but I'm probably not going to read all seven. You could prove me wrong, but start with one. So yours is A Flutter of Darkness.
I would say, well, what do you like to read?
Oh, okay. I was talking more in general for people who want to find you and buy the book. Um, I loved the movie Sixth Sense, which is what you kind of are reminding me of, where you're like on the edge of your seat and it's
Hmm.
scary, but not in a horror way. in
Okay.
a edge of your seat way, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, for you, I'd recommend two. I'd
Okay.
recommend either The Cold Room,
Okay.
which is my first novel, or A Flutter of Darkness, which is the collection of short stories. And you
Yeah.
can find either one of those at Amazon.com or go to JNLaVelle.com. It's super easy to find me there. But yeah, either one of those would be good for you.
Awesome. I want people to know, where can people find you? What's the best place to find you? How do you get in touch to be on one of the podcasts if people are interested in that?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I'll tell you what, find me on Facebook. I'm on Facebook as Jason LaVelle. If you find me on there, you'll see my podcast, or just send me a direct message, and we'll get connected, and I'll be happy to work with you.
I love that. Jay, thank you so much for being on. I really appreciate it. Your story's incredible.
I don't know about incredible, but thank you for having me on.